Welcome to Key Review 15, Persuasive Communication. Consider your audience, principles and strategies of effective persuasion in communication. Persuasion is the process of attempting to change or reinforce an audience's attitudes, beliefs, values, or behaviors. What is persuasion in action? Think of it as convincing students to donate blood, in other words, changing behavior, or strengthening a community's commitment to safe driving. In other words, reinforcing values. So remember, persuasion is how we change or reinforce an audience's attitudes, values, beliefs, or behaviors. What are ways to motivate an audience? We can use cognitive dissonance, fear appeals, or positive appeals. Cognitive dissonance is when we highlight a mismatch between what people value and what they do, then offer a way to resolve it. For example, you value saving money, yet your current phone plan costs more than this student plan. Switching resolves that gap. Fear appeals can present a credible threat and a workable action your audience can take. Threat plus efficacy of action. For example, texting while driving quadruples crash risk. Enable do not disturb while driving before you start the car. Positive appeals emphasize the benefits your recommendation delivers. For example, using the campus rec center 3 times a week improves sleep and focus. So there are 3 ways to motivate audiences. We can use dissonance, fear appeals, or positive appeals. What's the difference between attitudes, beliefs, and values? An attitude is what we learn to like or dislike. They're the most changeable of our 3. For example, I like a walkable campus. Beliefs are what you hold to be true or false. They structure your view of reality. For example, bike lanes reduce accidents. Values are enduring ideas of right and wrong. These are the least changeable. For example, protecting public safety matters. So we have attitudes, beliefs, and values differentiated by most easily changed at attitudes to least easily changed as values. What's the difference between fact, value, and policy statements? Fact statements assert what is, was, will be true or false. For example, campus bike thefts increased last year. Value judges worth or importance, uses evaluative language like good, better, or best. For example, on-campus housing is better for first-year student success than off-campus housing. Policy advocates a specific action, often using the word should. For example, the university should fund free weekend transit passes. So that's the difference between fact, value, and policy statements. How can we define ethos or credibility and differentiate the factors within credibility or ethos? Ethos or credibility is the audience perception of a speaker's competence, trustworthiness, and dynamism or charisma, judged before, during, and after the speech. Competence is simply being knowledgeable or skillful. You show it by citing current sources and explaining methods accurately. Trustworthiness is about being fair and honest. You show it by acknowledging limits, presenting opposing views accurately. Dynamism and charisma are about being confident and engaging. You show it with purposeful energy, vocal variety, and audience-centered enthusiasm. So the 3 parts that best define credibility or ethos are competence, trustworthiness, and dynamism/charisma. Remember, reasoning plus evidence equals proof. Reasoning is a thinking process that logically links your evidence to your main claim. We can use inductive reasoning, deductive reasoning, causal reasoning, or analogy. Inductive reasoning is like a right side up triangle. It moves from specific to general. For example, 3 campus pilots cut costs. Therefore, scaling will likely cut costs. Deductive reasoning is like an upside down triangle with the larger part on top. It moves from general to specific. If programs with peer mentors raise retention and ours has peer mentors, our retention should rise. Causal reasoning. An example of causal reasoning is impaired sleep leads to lower GPA. An example of analogy is managing your budget is like maintaining a car. Skip maintenance and costs could explode. Evidence is the support you present to back your claims. These can include facts, examples, statistics, expert or lay testimony, and analogies. For example, Dr. Lee's study found this. Proof, or logos, is the combination of evidence and reasoning, forming the logical backbone of your persuasive messages, because reasoning plus evidence equals proof. So remember, reasoning plus evidence equals proof. There are three patterns for persuasive messages that you need to know. We have problem solution, cause effect, or effect cause, and Monroe's motivated sequence. Problem solution. This pattern first presents a problem, then offers a practical solution. For example, food insecurity among students could be solved with expanding the campus pantry with evening hours. Cause effect, or effect cause, organizes content by explaining a cause and its resulting effects, or vice versa. For example, cause effect. Rising textbook prices cause course withdrawal. Monroe's motivated sequence includes attention, need, satisfaction, visualization, and action. In the attention step, you grab your audience's attention by highlighting a pressing issue, such as imagine choosing between rent and groceries. In the need step, you establish the problem by presenting data and evidence. For example, data on student food insecurity. In the satisfaction step, you propose a clear and practical solution to the identified need. For example, you present a workable pantry expansion. In the visualization step, you help your audience imagine the future, both with and without your proposed solution. You would show the campus with and without the change. In the action step, you clearly tell your audience what specific action to take. For example, we want you to sign up for a volunteer shift and share the link tonight. So problem solution, cause effect, or effect cause, and Monroe's motivated sequence are all effective organizational patterns for persuasive messages. What are some strategies for persuading receptive, neutral, and unreceptive audiences? If an audience is receptive, they already agree generally. Your goal is to strengthen and activate their existing views. You want to state your request clearly, use emotional stories, provide a next step, and get specific. For example, since we all value safety, join me in this proposition. Neutral audiences lack strong views. Your aim is to inform them and make the topic relevant to their lives. You want to hook them in the intro, connect to shared concerns, and use strong, balanced evidence. Set modest goals. For example, here's how this affects your tuition and time this semester. An unreceptive audience disagrees with your position. You need to show respect and find common ground. Start with agreements. Place strongest arguments first. Acknowledge opposing evidence fairly. Avoid attacking, and ask for a small step. For example, we agree student well-being matters. Here's one low-cost step we could try. Those are different strategies for persuasion for receptive, neutral, and unreceptive. For receptive, we're strengthening and activating. For neutral, we're informing them and making the topic relevant. For unreceptive, we're showing respect and finding common ground. How do we apply the 5 principles when speaking to persuade? We are aware of communication with ourselves and others by focusing on your motives and ethics, replacing negative self-talk with task-oriented focus and preparing for potential pushbacks. We effectively use and interpret verbal messages by framing clear propositions of fact, value, or policy, using unbiased, audience-appropriate wording, and defining all of our key terms. We effectively use and interpret nonverbal messages by enhancing arguments through confident posture, steady eye contact, purposeful movement, and varied vocal variety. We listen and respond thoughtfully to others by actively reading audience cues, inviting questions, and thoughtfully paraphrasing objections before responding. We appropriately adapt messages to others by matching our appeals. For example, cognitive dissonance, fear appeals, or positive appeals, and organizational patterns like problem solution, cause effect, or Monroe's motivated sequence. We appropriately adapt messages to others by matching appeals and organizational patterns to your audience's attitudes and readiness. So the 5 principles as applied are being aware, using verbal and nonverbal messages effectively, listening and responding thoughtfully, and appropriately adapting our messages to the audience, because at every step of the speaking process, we consider our audience.